Today on the Daily Charge, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple head back to Washington, our latest in our 5G series, and happy Prime Day, everybody!
Good morning. Welcome to CNET's Daily Charge. It's Monday, July 15th. I'm Roger Chang.
I'm Ben Fox-Rubin.
Let's take a look at those headlines. Amazon's Prime Day is here, and after 5 years, it's grown from a goofy sideshow into a massive shopping phenomenon. Ben, you've been on top of this.
Yes.
What's going on?
Man, it's Prime Day.
It's Prime Day. You sound so excited.
Yeah. People are really interested in Prime Day. It's 5 years now, and Amazon has obviously done a really good job of adding new stuff into Prime Day all the time to get people interested and still talking about it. Like this year, it was a Taylor Swift concert, which nobody can get Taylor Swift, but apparently Amazon could. So
well, you wrote a great story. It's kind of looking at the cultural impact of Prime Day and how really it's changed the way we've shopped, right? It's basically created a Black Friday-esque event in the summer.
Yes, yeah, and that's really rare. A lot of retailers have tried to do this for years, if not decades, to try to get people to shop more in the summer. They do this Christmas and July thing. It never really took off. So in part due to the economy, in part due to just dumb luck, Amazon was able to just fall into being able to get Prime Day to really take off, and it's causing people on one end to hold off their shopping, to wait for Prime Day, and on the other end, instead of buying them back to school or maybe even the holiday, now you're buying on Prime Day. So it's kind of consolidating the shopping into this 2-day window.
No, it hasn't been all smooth sailing, right? There have been outages the last 2 years in a row.
Yeah, it may have been two. There was one that was particularly bad last year, and then I think the previous one was in 2016 that wasn't as bad, where people had a hard time of getting into actually checking things out once they put them into their shopping carts. Last year was so atrocious, where I think it was in the middle of the day, it was right at the beginning at noon, and the whole thing fell apart. The mobile app didn't work, the website didn't work, and that went on for roughly an hour or so.
Yeah, and so beyond the sales and deals, there's sort of a downside to things. We're seeing protests erupt all over the country, really looking at some of the issues in its warehouse, which have been fairly widespread. We've reported on some of the issues there.
Yeah, this is what happens when you create a fake shopping holiday in the middle of the summer that you get all the attention, you get all the eyeballs on you. Well, you're going to end up inviting protests, and it's going to elicit that kind of thing. And so those concerns about treatment of warehouse workers is going to come up. Allegations that Amazon has been working with ICE, which, by the way, Amazon does not talk about whether it is or isn't working with ICE. That's been coming up. There's going to be a protest outside of Jeff Bezos' house in like half an hour from now in New York. And also concerns about just climate change. There's an Amazon employee group that's pushing for Amazon to do more on the climate. They're also talking up about this, and that's what happened where Prime Day is really getting all these people to talk about these concerns.
Yeah, Prime Day is definitely a great platform to get your news out. So next up, get ready for a busy week in D.C. as they grill the tech giants. The House Judiciary Committee will question Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple over whether they hold too much power. Meanwhile, the Senate Banking Committee will question Facebook over its Libra cryptocurrency. This comes after President Trump held his social media summit on Thursday without any actual social media companies.
Yeah, we'll see how much attention this event tomorrow gets. These are not, as far as I can tell, heavy hitters from any of these companies. There's a lot of folks that I haven't heard of. They're from the public policy side of these companies, or they're from the legal side. So this isn't a Sundar Pichai event. This isn't a Mark Zuckerberg event, but at the same time, we might get some interesting nuance, or we might get some useful context as far as, like, at the very least, how these companies are trying to defend themselves against the potential for regulation, and in a worst case scenario for them, potentially breaking up the companies.
Well, yeah, we'll see what actually gets done, because I feel like there are competing interests even on just the government side of things. People can't even agree from a regulation perspective on what they want, right? Some folks want more privacy rules. Some folks want to address the issue of bias, against conservative voices. So there are all these competing agendas, and it just doesn't seem like anything will get done.
Yeah.
Which sounds a lot like DC.
Well, meanwhile, what do you think the potential is for any of these breakups to actually happen?
I think it's a really tough one. I think it's an issue that these tech companies are particularly sensitive to. I just don't know if it'll actually get done. Obviously, a lot of noise was made about Microsoft getting broken up back in the day. That never happened.
Yeah, and that was years.
Right. Lastly, the latest in our 5G series looks at how technology has gotten caught up in a broader trade war between the U.S. and China. Our own Maggie Reardon takes a look at the stakes as both China and the U.S. are jockeying for the leadership in 5G, which the winner potentially shaping the geopolitics and technology scheme for the next decade.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What do we need to be paying attention to here? Is this? I feel like Huawei is back in the mix as it relates to this because they have a lot to do with infrastructure and particularly 5G infrastructure. Is that right?
That's exactly it. Huawei is sort of the big name, big company that stands out there as the number 2 smartphone player, the world's largest telecom equipment maker. Now, they supply some equipment actually to some U.S. rural carriers. They're not allowed in the big 4, but given the security issues and the ramp up in government scrutiny over some of its practices, it feels partly like the security issues are valid in one sense, but also it does feel like this is heavily politicized. This is really more about Trump and more about getting leverage to strike better terms with China in terms of trade deals.
So if the U.S. doesn't end up using any of that Huawei technology, are we in this country at a disadvantage in any way that like maybe we're losing out on any sort of useful infrastructure that maybe we should be using?
No, it's a great question. It's still kind of mixed at this point because there are enough of these other suppliers. Interestingly enough, due to all the consolidation in this industry, there are actually no U.S. suppliers of telecom equipment anymore.
What?
Like Lucent, they got purchased, right? And so we've got Nokia, Ericsson, Samsung. So they're folks in other countries that are our core suppliers, right? There's like the Intels and the Ciscos, but they don't supply sort of the main components. So. It's hard to tell whether or not losing out on Huawei equipment is really going to hurt us. I think the bigger issue is 5G is an international standard set by multiple companies, and if we're trying to basically block out Huawei from contributing even more, even though Huawei actually does have more patents than China. Sorry, China, thanks to Huawei, has more patents related to 5G than the U.S. or Korea.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
crazy. You can tell there's someone in the White House just thinking about this, thinking ahead and going, well, I don't know if I want China to be in that driver's position for 5G and then having us sort of follow them.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, now for today's main story, more on Amazon Prime Day. All right, Ben.
What? I already used up all my talking points. Sorry.
Well, look. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the deals that are out there. We're not going to talk specifically on like what deals you should get.
But you can ask me. I'm ready for it.
Generally, like what would be your advice to shoppers looking for deals at Prime Day? Because I admit I pulled up the site today and it was just overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know if a deal is actually a legit deal or if it's just something that kind of mocked up to be made. To like get you to buy.
Make it look jazzier than it actually is.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I'm not here to tell you whether that is or isn't a deal. We talked about Camel, which is a website that actually tracks price changes every single day on Amazon. And it's because the prices are dynamic on the website that they tend to vary pretty consistently, if like almost hour by hour.
Right.
That being said, if you're going to buy an Amazon branded product like Amazon Electronics, like you want an Echo speaker, that's like $25 today. Usually it's $50. So you're going to get a deal on that. There's a lot of electronics deals that are going on. It's pretty easy to know what the specific price is on that stuff. Like for instance, the Sonos Beam, that's usually $400. Now it's $360 plus you get a $100 Amazon gift certificate.
Right.
Okay, so if you were really interested in getting it, now you can get it for a lot cheaper, and that's pretty clear indication there. But as far as like general things that you should do, like try to avoid impulse buying as best as you can. Like the last thing you really want to do is just spend on something because it's really cheap and then just have it sit around your house and you never actually open it out of the packaging. So,
which someone you interviewed actually did that, right? They
yes.
have unopened packages.
And by the way, he's a personal finance expert. So it could happen to you. It could happen to anybody. And the retailers are banking on that.
Right.
Like there's this fervor that gets like, there's just kind of like a feeding frenzy that ends up happening. You want to get in on the deals. There's this FOMO. and you just start jumping around to different websites and want to take part in it. So Joan, for instance, has already spent quite a bit of money on Prime Day, and she usually does because if you're savvy about it, you go in with like a good discipline, then
my wife has an extremely long list of things we have to do for the upcoming baby.
Yeah.
And so we've got things like diapers on the list, so baby monitors. So we'll see if those actually pan out as deals or if they actually show up. But I think you're generally right in that, like, it's good to have that list going in so you kind of know what you want and resist those impulse purchases.
And I've done this before. The last thing that you want to do is like have a sunken cost type of situation where you spend a lot of time looking for deals, you don't find anything you actually want, and then you're like, screw it, I'm just going to buy this thing even though I don't need it because I spent all this time on the website. Yeah, try not to do that if you can help it.
Well, generally, I will say if you do want to check out the deals, CNET's got it. Have to have a quick plug. Please check out CNET. We've got a comprehensive list of all the deals.
Yes.
Not all, but most. All the deals that are worth checking out.
We have a lot of, there's a lot of deals information on CNET. I personally do not write about any of it, but I'm fully aware that we do a lot of deals coverage. So if you do want to check it out, go ahead.
All right, hey, don't forget this show is just as much about you folks in the audience as it is about us. So make sure to fire off your questions and comments about today's topics, and we'll fish out the best and get to them at the end of the show. And on that note, what do you think of this new format? Any likes, dislikes? What do you want to see more of? We'd love to get your feedback. So either tweet at us at The Daily Charge or sound off in this chat. In fact, Brian, what do we have in the comments so far?
So right out the gate, we've got a bunch of our local best favorites, everybody who's gone with us through the transition. We're so happy to have you along for the ride. First and foremost, let's take one from Timothy, who's always loaded with great questions. This one... This ought to be fun for you guys to handle. Tim asks, imagine if the NYC outage happened during Prime Day.
Yeah,
Ooh,
go
we were off by a day. There was an outage this weekend.
2
on the west side.
Yeah, the NYC outage, what, happened on Saturday?
Saturday, yeah.
So,
if it went out, like, that would, if it affected the whole country or just New York, because that just affected New York, and I imagine that.
And everybody knew about it.
Yeah, and I don't think that would slow Amazon down, frankly.
Yeah. Well, that's why. So the protests are a good point here too. In that, are the protests going to slow Amazon down? Like in Minnesota, there's actually going to be a strike going on there. And as best as I can tell, no, that's not going to slow Amazon down. Those protests were already announced a week ago. And if Amazon needed to prepare or kind of cycle things around to make sure that Prime Day wouldn't get off without a hitch, then it's going to be okay. As far as like, the protests are obviously important in highlighting those concerns, but customers are making those orders with the awareness that they want this stuff in a day or two. So if you are one of those customers, no, you're probably not going to have to worry about that. And I guess that's worth mentioning too.
There you go.
Next question is coming from Srinjoy. He says, Ben, find me a deal for an all-in-one mini sound system during the show, similar to the OK45.
Never. I'm not going to do that. And you know we're buds. I've known you for a long time, but there's not a chance I'm going to find you any deals.
I would say check out CNET.
Check out CNET.
I'm sure
if
the
you
deals
want.
are listed there. We have many, many deals.
Yes.
We have all the deals.
I mentioned 2 deals today, and that's already way too many for me.
All right, next up, we got another one from Tim. It says, do you think restaurants will ever have their own version of Prime Day, somewhat an extension of Restaurant Week?
I mean, yeah, there's Restaurant Week, I guess. That's an interesting idea, though, like having like an annual day where restaurants around the world, like, or country.
So everybody's jumping in on Prime Day. I don't see why restaurants wouldn't do it too, where it's like a Prime Day brunch special. So Retail Me Not this year came out with a statistic that they said that about 250 retailers are expected to take part in Prime Day this year. And that's up from 7 in 2015. So that was the first Prime Day and like hardly anybody paid attention to it. Now it's basically like, we know you're on your computer. It's kind of like another Cyber Monday. So if you're going to go on Amazon, go on Walmart, go on Target, go on Best Buy, you're going to see deals in all those places. And will restaurants do the same thing at some point? I guess if you could get a good tie-in, maybe, sure.
Yeah, like, I don't know, like after all that shopping, you can go to a restaurant and get your that next deal at that restaurant.
So
Prime Day special.
And Whole Foods is part of Prime Day because Whole Foods is owned by Amazon. So you could, in theory, I don't know what the grocers are doing, but I guess the grocers are at least going to join in, which is one step closer to restaurants. So
there you go.
Thanks, everybody, for all your kind words about the new format and feedback. We're so glad that you're enjoying it so far. Please do sound off if you do have any criticisms or constructive criticisms, or if you just think we're all dummies. We've heard that before.
Okay.
What are
Now
your
they're definitely going to say that.
What are your opinions about the invite-only associations handpicked by Facebook to join the Libra Circle? And will that and should that be investigated?
Is that's more for the beta version of it, right? I mean, not the beta, but like that's sort of like the early access.
They're just testing it out.
They're
at
just
this
testing
point.
it out.
To be clear, there's so much heat on Libra
Yeah.
now. I don't know if it's ever actually going to lift off.
Right.
Like Washington is already really on top of it. They've got a lot of concerns about Libra, and there's already this embedded worry about, are these giant tech companies, and there are really only like 5 of them.
Right.
Do they have too much power? Well, now Facebook, during this conversation, comes around and decides we're going to create our own digital currency.
Yeah, the timing of that's pretty terrible, and I think some of the verification requires you to like submit your like photo ID.
Yeah.
Right. So
which is not atypical.
it's not, but also a company whose track record in privacy has been kind of spotty, coming up and asking you for even more of your personal information just seems
Totally.
like a little tone deaf. So look, that's why DC is looking at Facebook now. It's why they're looking at Libra. There's definitely a lot of concern. I mean, it was in Trump's hindsight or targets for a little while. So
Yeah, he already tweeted about it.
yeah,
He was like, this is BS. Like,
Yeah.
Bitcoin is stupid and Libra is even stupider.
right.
So,
So yeah, it's a little. I mean, in terms of full-on investigations, I know we'll see, but I mean, they're already looking into Libra. It hasn't even launched yet, and
Yeah.
the Senate committee here is already taking a very close look at this. So we'll see.
If a company were to break up after the congressional hearing, can they later merge again? And if so, what is the allotted time frame for that?
Okay.
Ooh,
So that's
great
like
question.
such a hypothetical.
That's a great question.
The likelihood
Has
of
that ever
breakups-
happened historically?
Yes, companies have definitely been broken up before. The most notable recent example was AT&T. I think that was back in the 70s.
It's not that recent, but yeah.
That was, well, because it
Relatively
doesn't
speaking.
happen.
Right,
It doesn't
relatively
happen that
speaking,
often.
yes.
The railroads had been broken up. Standard Oil had been broken up. So there is some like history to this, but it really does not happen with any significant regularity. And it's an enormous, enormous effort by regulators and the government to actually break up companies after they've actually come together. Generally speaking, when you do break up a company, there are a lot of regulations attached to it to ensure that they don't just merge again into like a different organization.
But you look at AT&T, parts of it did merge together, not as like one whole company, but Verizon and AT&T are essentially made up of smaller bells that were broken up when AT&T was broken up. But that process took decades.
Yep.
And again, there isn't like one behemoth out there that controls the telecom market. It's still multiple players. So yes, there are instances where companies can get broken up and come back together in some smaller extent, but not to the original sort of form that it was.
And it's worth thinking about too that like just because we're talking about breakup, oh yeah, we're going to break up the tech companies. Well, how are you going to break up the tech
Right.
companies? It once you get into those details, it gets really, really complicated
Yeah.
really quickly. Facebook is a really easy example where it's like, okay, Facebook and Instagram, maybe we'll break those up. Maybe we'll break up WhatsApp too. But Amazon, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to get rid of AWS, their cloud computing service? Are you going to make them, as Elizabeth Warren suggested, separate their marketplace from their first-party business? So like Amazon sells this stuff,
Right.
and then the marketplace business sells another stuff. Or are you just going to tell them to sell off Zappos? Because they also own Zappos.
Or with Apple and the App Store, right? That's the one that
Right.
gets floated around. Like that would be really difficult. That's so core to the experience that Apple sells. Like it's hard to imagine being able to break that up and have those two kind of survive, I guess.
Yeah. So I always remember a quote from one of the European agencies. The Europeans have been way, way harder
Right.
on big tech than the U.S. agencies, at least up to this point. And even they said that is a last-ditch move, that they would actually do a breakup. So I would say as we talk about this, because we are going to be talking about this for a long time in the tech industry, just be aware of the fact that a breakup is the most extreme outcome out of all of these scenarios that we're looking at. Regulation is a much more likely road, and we'll see. Like that's another one where like what are the details there too, and
Right.
what's that going to be directed at?
All right, we're in the home stretch here. Let's take just a couple more. Yan wants to know how come Microsoft is never really included in the big tech listings and all these hearings. Maybe they've just kind of served their sentence prior in the 90s?
I mean, that's probably it,
Yeah.
right? They went through this whole process. It didn't work out. Like the government tried and failed to break it up.
Well, they also faced considerably more regulation. So
Yes.
that regulatory hurdle has already been cleared by them, where they were forced to open up Windows to some of their competitors. They were forced to, okay, if you're going to include Internet Explorer, now you have to include some competing web browsers too.
Right.
So no, they did not break up, and they came really close to being broken up. But yeah, like that's why we're not talking about Microsoft as much, because that already happened in the 90s and early 2000s, and we already know that outcome.
And in terms of like the power they wield, I mean, I know they're a valuable company, but it's hard to argue that you'd put them in the same kind of tier as Apple or Facebook in terms of the
I don't know
amount of
about
power.
that.
Well,
They're the world's, like, they're the biggest U.S. company by market cap.
By
They're
market
worth more
cap.
than $1 trillion.
by market cap, but not necessarily by influence. They're very B2B at this point, and I think it's also a lot harder for politicians to make it an issue because they're relatively invisible from a consumer perspective, right?
Now they are. Yeah.
From like a Surface. Yes, we have our Windows operating systems, but they're not. It's not like necessarily.
I don't have them in my pocket
Yeah,
the same way that
it's
I
not,
have
it doesn't
Google,
dominate your.
Android.
It's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't dominate your life like Android or iOS does.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And I guess, yeah, that's the argument why Microsoft isn't being brought up. I think it is worth at least mentioning them as part of the conversation. Because, yeah, absolutely, they are one of the big U.S. tech companies for sure.
Yep.
We got time for just two more. Let's take one from Will. If these companies were better at preventing any of the bad things that they have had happened on their platforms, would there even be a discussion about the size of the company or the amount of power?
Oh, that's a good question.
That is a really good question. I don't know if like Facebook would run in the same scrutiny. Same with Google. That I think, yeah, one kind of rolled into the other, right? Because there were troubles. Politicians kind of found this an attractive issue to rally behind. I don't know if it would have snowballed as much as it has.
It took the polish off those companies for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Like Facebook was not looked in the way that it is now.
Right.
2 years ago, 3 years
Right.
ago.
We were cheering Facebook and Google as these like champions of free market capitalism, of like the success stories out of America, and now we kind of look at them in a much different light.
What did you guys do? Put these pieces back together, please.
There you go.
And lastly, on the way out the gate, what do we think about the alleged strikes that are supposed to be happening today? And then to counter that, what are some of our favorite deals we're seeing highlighted? Tim points out the $20 PlayStation Classic. That's not bad. I might even grab one of those just because even though the PlayStation Classic has a wishy-washy return on it, $20, how can you lose?
True.
Yeah, as far as the protests are concerned, similar protests ended up happening during Amazon's shareholder meeting. I would say that, and Google has faced a ton of protests too for other issues, like how they deal with sexual assault and harassment, like, for their former employees. So I would say expect protests like this against major tech companies, especially Amazon, because Amazon, the warehouse worker thing is just not going to go away for them.
Right.
Anytime they have a major event going on. In Europe, there are Amazon protests that go on virtually every single Black Friday. So is that something that's going to come to the US with more consistency? I don't know. We'll find out.
All right, be safe at Area 51, everybody. Roger, you want to go ahead and cue us on out of here?
Yeah, all right. That just about does it for us. Thanks for joining us today. We are live weekday mornings here on YouTube, Periscope, and CNET.com/dailycharge. Check the description below for links to today's stories and to subscribe to the audio podcast so you never miss a beat. For the Daily Charge, I'm Roger Chang.
I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
Thanks for listening.